Hello, everyone. So great to see your faces. I'm sort of in the dark here, and I'm so thrilled that you're here taking part in this very timely and important discussion. When I started preparing for this panel, I was reminded of something I heard from a pretty prominent DEI professional a number of years ago. It was well in the before times. Barbara Y., who was then at Intel and is now at Apple, said in one discussion, I don't want to hear the case for diversity anymore. We know the business case for diversity. I want to hear the case against it. And at the time, I had no idea how prescient that was going to be. When you fast forward to this year or so, where things have become so polarized that people have stepped up to the plate to make the case for being anti-woke and to take the D out of DE&I. And to me, that is a case against belonging. So I'm going to ask you all, how many times in your life have you felt like you did not belong somewhere? Show of hands. Let me see. A lot of hands going up there. And were those times you felt like you wished you did belong? Show of hands again. Yeah, I'm seeing hands raised. We still have work to do. DEI is a very important part of our workplaces, and we can't give up on that. I'm going to get off my soapbox now, and I'm going to ask this wonderful panel to introduce themselves briefly and tell us about a time that you felt that you didn't belong and what that meant to you. Derek.
Okay, so Derek Gordon, I'm Chief Diversity Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. I grew up a little bit differently in the professional world. I was on the commercial side for most of my career, all but the last 4 years. Before I got the diversity and inclusion job, I was running a global toothbrush business, but I was brand management, general management, ran a Canadian business for a while. And then our CEO called me after George Floyd and asked, if I would be interested in leading our efforts around diversity and inclusion. And I thought we train a lot of people to, run businesses. It's what we do. But this is an opportunity to help change the culture of the organization. And I realized then that there was a window of opportunity to drive that change. And I thought this would be a great thing to do and a very good experience. And I believed that I could actually make a difference. So it's been a great experience for me. On the example of a time that I felt like I did not belong, I'm actually not going to give an example that's related to me, but my best friend from high school. We were, so I grew up in primarily white neighborhoods for most of my life as an Army brat. We moved around a lot. But a friend that I met when I went to high school, that when we were in our early 20s, he's still my best friend today. I took him to a black club. And, we went in and sat down, ordered a drink, and after we were in about 5 minutes, he sort of looked to the right, looked to the left, he looked at me, and he said, "Derek, this is how you feel every day." So he is my best friend because his empathy clearly came through, that he recognized from that experience that this wasn't about how he was feeling, but he understood that, oh my goodness, it's like this is what you have to deal with every day, which is part of why he's still my best friend. But it provided a real sense of understanding, I think, for underrepresented people, if you sort of ladder this up for a minute, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes for a minute, to feel like what it really feels like to be other. And when you are other, that it is not a great feeling, and it is something you have to struggle with. And sometimes there are truly both cultural and structural reasons that will limit your opportunity to be able to drive. That was a great learning and a good foundation for me when I think about this job and what I've been doing for the last 4 years.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is my name is Lukeisha Paul, and I'm the head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for GroupM, which is a world-leading media investment company. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I've been with the company for about 20 years, and the last 5 years as head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Prior to that, in the media investment world, my example of a time where I felt like I didn't belong was when I was in college. So my family's from Trinidad and Venezuela. I was born and raised in New York, Brooklyn, New York, and then we moved to Queens. And so I like to think that I have the best of all cultures and all worlds. And I went to Howard University, and naturally gravitated to what I thought I was more familiar with, which would be the Trinidad group of individuals there. And being around them, we would have great conversations, and then it would get to a certain point where they would talk about some specifications around the island that I couldn't contribute because I wasn't born and raised there. And then slowly after, they would say, well, you're not really from Trinidad. You're really American. And so I had my American friends, and we would talk similarly, and they would talk about things that are ingrained into the history of America. And though I was born and raised here and I understand that history, my family was very cultural. So I grew up in a Caribbean household in a Caribbean area. And so I also couldn't necessarily empathize with all of that. And so they were like, well, you're not really American, you're from Trinidad. And I found myself at a cross section of, where do I fit in? And it was very uncomfortable, and I struggled with it for a while. And I think what I learned out of that was the appreciation of intersectionality and the different layers of diverse dimensions that we all exhibit based on our unique lived experiences. Today, that helps me because I understand that any individual can experience being the only one or the underrepresented. And so when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it allows me to see everyone and to understand each individual has a unique lived experience. And that's what we're looking for everybody to bring forth. So that's my example.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Tinsley-Fix, and I am with AARP. I've been there a while now, and my role is to engage with you all, the DEI, HR, and ERG community on the value of older workers in particular, but really about the value of age diversity and what all ages bring to their organizations and why age inclusion is important and matters. And I would say, like Lukeisha, like you, I'm a third culture kid, not because of different, racial background, but because I moved every 3 years. My father was in the Navy. I've lived all over the world and never really lived anywhere until I became an adult. But I would say my example for a time when I felt I didn't belong was a few careers ago. I was the most junior person on a team that was negotiating a really big contract renewal with an enormous company that I won't name. And I remember being at the end of a conference table that was about as long as this stage. And I just felt so intimidated and so young. And most of the people there was an army of lawyers, there was an army of consultants, and there were these very high-ranking, august people there. Most of them were men, and they just looked right past me. Like they didn't even look at me at all. And so what I took from that was, I'm gonna learn everything I could learn, like drinking from a fire hose, but it definitely felt like I was totally didn't exist because they wouldn't look at me. And I know I was the most junior person, but I think something as small as that, just making eye contact with even the youngest folks around the table can really matter.
Hi, I'm Michal. I'm a founder and CEO of Visit.org. We are a global company that helps global enterprises engage their employees in volunteering activities as well as a lot of ERG engagement. So we bring to life topics of identity, ERG, intersectionality, and so on through team-based activations and interactions with local nonprofits on the ground that usually support community members of similar identity groups and so on. We work with companies such as Amazon, AT&T, KPMG, Comcast, and others. A story of a feeling that I did not belong. Early in my career, I studied software engineering. Right out of college, I joined a group of engineers in a tech company. I was very excited. I was the only woman out of a group of about 15 other men. And started the working days. A few months into my career there, I one day walk into the office. It was back in the day where we still have offices every day, and we had also our like seats and computers at the desk. So I come in the morning, I turn on my computer, and I see that I received an email from the man that was working with me, and my team was sitting right next to me, and he was already there. I look at the email, and I open the email, and I see that it had some inappropriate pictures of women. And I look at the mailing list and I see a bunch of men from my team and other teams in the organization, all are part of that mailing list. And I guess he accidentally, my name can very easily be, typoed into a male name. I guess he accidentally added me to that group. And I look at it, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I was shocked. And I was also new. And so I looked over to him and I asked him, did you just send me this email? What is it? And he looked at me and he looked at the email and he realized that he made the mistake that he made. And he was thinking for a minute, trying to figure out how he was gonna get himself out of it. And then he looked at me and he said, well, I accidentally added you to this group that we have, but well, now you are one of the guys. So that was a story that I learned. What I learned from it is, yes, I definitely wanted to belong. I was the only woman that was part of the group, but not at all costs.
All right. Yeah.
Marie, well, I can absolutely resonate with everything that everyone on the panel has shared so far. My name is Marie Carasco. I am the Vice President of Organization Development, Culture, and Diversity at GitHub, which is a Microsoft company. And when I think about a moment in time, I have many, in time where I felt that I didn't belong. The one that stands out the most for me is when I was in grad school, completing my doctorate. And the program didn't have a lot of people who, like myself, representation was fairly low for people of color.
Can we hit the mic on this one, please? Sorry, folks.
Trying one more time. And another time. Are you all able to hear me? Not yet.
I hear
I
but
can wait. Or project.
Thank you for bearing with us. There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me?
no.
No?
No? Don't go far. No. Maybe this
I
is the
can give you
moment where
About those Mets. Well,
Okay.
I just want to, while we're waiting here, not to take away from your story, but I really do appreciate everybody being vulnerable and talking about this because,
Your mic's not on. Your
my
mic.
mic's not on either? Wow, okay.
trying one more time.
No.
Still not happening.
There, yours is good.
I wonder about the podium.
Talking to my microphone.
Right, yes.
Is the podium available?
May I? Is
Yeah.
the podium working?
Go for it.
I mean, it seems so official.
We'll flex. Let's go.
Give it a go, just for the sake of time also. Thanks for being flexible. Trying again, still not working. Are you able to hear me from here? Yeah. Wow, awesome. Okay. Really, I don't know if the story is gonna warrant the applause, but thank you so much. I appreciate it. As I was saying earlier, I feel like I resonate with everything that my fellow panelists shared. And my name is Marie Carasco. I am the Vice President of Organization Development, Culture, and Diversity at GitHub, which is a Microsoft company. And I was saying earlier that the moment that stands out to me, where I felt like I didn't belong, happened in grad school when I was completing my doctoral degree. There weren't a lot of folks there, students who looked like me, and faculty also didn't have a lot of folks who looked like me. And so there were moments where it felt really tough. When you're completing a degree like that, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of work, and you go through a lot of emotional challenges. And what I took away from that experience is, as a baseline, representation can really make a difference in fostering a sense of belonging, just as a baseline. But in a really full circle moment, when I actually had the opportunity to teach at the grad level, there were a number of students that came up to me so happy that I was there. And it made me feel, that I was making a difference for them in terms of being present, as a person of color. And it was also the first time that many of them even had a professor that was a person of color. And so it was a full circle moment for me. So, thank you.
I'll take my turn at the podium. to ask the question? Okay. So I want to do a quick round robin on this because we know that inclusion and belonging starts pretty much before somebody comes in the door with hiring. So let's just quickly go through and talk about some ways that you can, or that you're looking at acquisition and interviewing and onboarding to make people feel like they belong right out of the gate. Derek.
The core of us, in terms of what our efforts are, is really about going to the pools of the populations that we are looking for. We will never hire somebody that we don't think is good enough or promote somebody that we don't think deserves to be promoted. But what you do have to do is put in the extra effort to make sure that you are going to where those population pools are so you can find the great talent that you would not otherwise consider if you were just depending on going to the current, going to the organizations or to the places where the current people in the company actually came from. So trying to lay that foundation, requiring diverse slates and the effort to make sure that the slates are indeed diverse is where we think it's really important to allow us to be able to make progress in increasing sort of the foundational level for representation within the company.
Yeah, I would say, so we're approaching this from an acquisition and retention perspective. And so one thing we did was we waived the needed to have a 4-year degree requirement because that just excludes so many that chose not to go that route. But in addition to that, we have a program called Launchpad where we bring in non-traditional backgrounded individuals into the organization. We hire them from day one into a curriculum program that teaches them all of the media one-on-ones that they need to learn to be successful in our company. And then we place them on a team. So it's bringing individuals into the organization, but also being mindful of the equity that needs to be built in. And so providing that from day one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I would say from the age diversity perspective, representation is really important. So I can't tell you the number of websites I go to and look at the career sites, and they're full of wonderful, happy young people. And that's fantastic, and we definitely want that. But just having a mix of ages, if I can see myself there, then I can already start to feel like I might belong. And then the other thing I would just emphasize is paying attention to durable human, sort of what we call soft skills, that take a long time to develop or can take a long time to develop and are transferable sort of across different job types. So just paying attention to that in addition to the sort of hard skills can really diversify your hiring pool from a perspective of age.
Michal.
So one thing we do with our corporate partners is we connect them with a nonprofit that works with the students from HBCUs and for volunteer opportunities. So different types of resume reviews, mock interviews, things like that, preparing the students for their future careers. A lot of time, what we really like to see happening is when our corporate partners come to us after these volunteer opportunities, after a couple of their teams go through this volunteer exercise, and they come to us and say, okay, we want to build a full year program that will engage our employees in this skills-based volunteering with these students, but then we also want to make sure that this will create a diverse pipeline for us by the end of the year once we get to know the students. And this has been a very successful program with several of our corporate partners, and we are very proud to help our corporate partners establish this type of pipeline in this way that also involves their employees in their day-to-day.
Yeah.
Marie.
Yeah. Fantastic. So echoing a lot of the things that a lot of my panelists are sharing here in terms of talent acquisition, but one of the things that we are keen to focus on at GitHub is the employee experience. So what happens once you actually join us? What are your expectations being met? Are we facilitating the right leveraging of your experiences and skills to help to drive our business direction? So I think companies just need to be thinking more thoughtfully. Yes, we can get folks to come in, but how are we thinking about what their experience is like within the organization to actually have them stay and build a strong retention strategy around that?
Well, and thank you. It's like she tees it up, and I'm going to, because I did want to talk about retention. Like it's not just enough to get people in the door. You have to get them to want to stay because they feel like they belong there and they want to do good work with the people who are around them. So, Lukeisha, you mentioned something about looking at underrepresented candidates,
by taking out the 4-year degree requirement. So how do you provide opportunities within the workforce once they're already hired?
Sure. So we actually have this great program that we started. It's called the GroupM Career Advocacy Program. We know, looking at industry stats, that once you continue up the corporate ladder, you'll see that there's a major decrease in disparity between people of color the more senior that you get. And so we found that it's because, and industry lets us know this as well, they don't see a clear career path for them. It could be a number of reasons. They don't see individuals that look like them in those particular levels, and so therefore they don't try to get to those levels because they feel like they wouldn't belong. It's not a place for them. Could also be the system and the systemic barriers that are in place that hinder that progress. So we created this program where it concentrates on both of those things. There are master classes that we do that speak to the you. And so some of your unique lived experiences, in particular for the groups that we've had, those who have been told in terms of their culture and their upbringing, just keep your head down and do the work and people would recognize you. Don't try to rock the boat and ask for anything extra. Be grateful for what you have. And all of these other really just negative, voices and thoughts of how people can be in their careers and just not doing a due diligence to help them move up that ladder. And the other part of this is people of color usually don't have that natural, organic advocacy that other individuals have. And so this program, we go through about 8 master classes where we focus on how to set big goals and how to move forward. And what does networking look like? We'll tell people, go out and network, but not explain to them, what does that mean? What does that look like? Who do you talk to and why do you talk to them? And how do you follow up, right? These are things that in some cases, based on your unique lived experiences, you have no idea what to do here. I know me personally, my family, I have no one that was in corporate America, so no one that taught me how to do those things. And then the other part of it is once we get them through the master classes and they can advocate for themselves because they now understand the value that they bring, is to pair them with senior leadership that truly advocates, not mentors, advocates for them, which means that they speak up for them behind closed doors, that they identify stretch assignments for them. And our advocates have to go through a workshop that teaches them how to be courageous advocates. So for example, if someone wants an opportunity and the advocate, on their behalf says, I think this is a great opportunity for Lukeisha. And they're told, well, Lukeisha lacks gravitas. She really doesn't have what it takes, to be in this position. So we're going to pass. The advocate learns how to then push back and say, can you explain what gravitas means? Mm-hmm. Can you explain your experiences with Lukeisha and why you don't think that she's right for this position? Mm-hmm. So it also makes people accountable. Yes. Accountable as opposed to just letting them off the hook. And with that, we've seen, I would say just from the master classes alone of individuals learning how to speak up on their behalf, we've seen raises, we've seen promotions, and then with the advocacy portion, we've seen senior leadership that now learn how to be courageous advocates, but also have a greater understanding of some of the hindrances that people of color actually go through and the systemic barriers that are still there today.
Being first generation is hard because you're just lacking all of the things that built in place for people who've been here for multiple generations. Yeah. So that's really important. Derek, you mentioned that the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action fails to acknowledge 38% of the US population that are people of color. So how is your organization providing opportunities for these underrepresented individuals?
It's funny. I started saying that I had a window of opportunity. I thought to be able to sort of drive change. And we see, frankly, across the country, in many circumstances across the world, that window closing. I think that window's closing because in the year of my birth, 90% of the country was white. Today, it's about 30. It is about 60%. Let's round it. And in the next 20, 25 years, it's going to be below 50%. Mm-hmm. You look at the LGBTQ population right now, and in the country, we're about 7-8% self-reported part of the LGBTQ community. But if you look at Gen Z, they report at about 20%. Mm-hmm. Our world is changing. There is a lot of effort to try to make sure that existing power structures sort of stay in place. And they're very intentional around the efforts. And that's what's going on with the Supreme Court cases for the universities to eliminate, considering race for for admission. That's playing into some of the states passing laws that are teaching, well, basically preventing you from being able to teach about the racist history of our country because it makes their children feel bad. But at the end of the day, it's our real history. And if you don't learn from our history, you cannot make sure that there are going to be changes and we learn to interact with each other fairly going forward. So starting with that's what we are working against. What's really important for us to make sure that we're doing within our organization is I am not about advantaging any one group versus another group. We are all about trying to make sure that there are no disadvantages for any one group versus any other group. And that really gets to, are we fairly considering all people all the time? Not just those that we are biased to based on our biases. And we will never be able to get rid of bias. We are human beings, we're very tribal, it's just innate in us to have particular biases.
Our brains have not evolved out of that yet.
That's right. But what we can do is try to make sure that each interaction with an individual, each assessment, each rating, each consideration for promotion within an organization is about that person, not whatever that person's identity is. And our efforts within the company about trying to make sure that we educate folks on how to set aside the biases that they have, not that we're saying that we don't want them to have biases, but just to make sure that you can set them aside when you're interacting with others. When you're creating an organization where you require individual objectives that require people managers to say, hey, how are you going to either create a more inclusive team or how are you going to build your own level of inclusiveness along the way? So we're requiring managers to be able to have capability to do that. We created an inclusion index, which we measure and report out on an annual basis, that has 10 questions as part of that for us, that identifies the areas that we have the most opportunities to be able to try and drive improvement on. And it is all about creating an environment where everybody feels safe, everybody feels like they can belong, and everybody feels like they have opportunity because they have an equal chance at consideration. Whether they're good enough or not, that's up to them. Whether they get considered, that's about us making sure that our structure in the organization and that our culture actually provides them the opportunity to be considered.
Thank you for that. Important not to forget, especially in polarizing times, that equity is really the goal. Heather, one stat that I just came across on a report that has just been released said that most executives think that someone age 58 is too old to hire.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say about that other than,
Yeah.
I'm 58.
Yeah.
I'd like to think I'm still hireable. So ageism, and I think it's because most people think, well, everybody gets old, so we just don't even talk about it. It's not really a part of diversity. But how do we create equal opportunities for people who are getting older, but still can add value to the workplace?
Yeah, well, I like to echo what Derek was talking about. It's more about removing disadvantages than sort of advantaging. One of the things that I always like to point out is just the sheer demographics of the labor force. So right now, 52% of the workforce is 40 plus. So over half of the workforce is over 40. And so the workforce is aging, but it's also shrinking. So there are not as many babies being born, as you know. And so there's a real need to hold on to everybody and to try and get everyone around the table and have them all stay and to develop them. So in terms of providing opportunity for older people, it's really important to remember that, and our research shows this over and over again, every year we do it, that older workers, and that by which we say 40 plus, because that's the age that is in the ADEA, but workers 40 plus, even workers 50 plus, 65 plus, all want to learn new skills. And they might need different types of supports. They might need different modalities of learning, but they want to learn new skills. And if you're, I know that the General Assembly was talking about John Deere, so they're going to reskill people instead of laying them off. You can do that with mid-career workers. You can do that with late career workers. So skilling is a big piece of it. And then just building the business case. And come to our booth or find me on LinkedIn, but we have lots and lots of, good arguments for the business case for age diversity. It's really just about making sure that you bring this issue into the open, because as you said, Lydia, it is very hidden, it's subterranean, it's something we all feel very comfortable joking about. And it starts from the time you are, little. It's suffused through media, and we've started to actually see I'm really pleased to see that we started to see older models on like J. Crew or Ralph Lauren or whatever. And so we really just need to bring it out into the open and talk about it openly because it's definitely something that feels acceptable to other people with. And it also goes both ways. It's usually for the most, the oldest folks in the workforce and the youngest folks in the workforce, right? People who are too young, there's a lot of microaggression, like, oh, I'm having a senior moment, or, oh, you're too young to remember that, or, those kinds of things which really chip away at feeling that you belong and that you have a place and that you can contribute.
Yep. Conversations are important, and ERGs are definitely a way to have conversations. You're in a group where you feel like you belong, and it's sort of inherently a safe space. However, the thing about ERGs is that it's basically unpaid, non-promotable task, and that becomes challenging for a lot of organizations because these people who are in the ERGs are generally from underrepresented groups. So, Michal, talk to me a little bit about how you can avoid burdening underrepresented workers with ERGs.
Yeah. We love ERGs because it's a great opportunity for employees to create meaningful conversation in a safe environment that otherwise a lot of time they don't have access to during their day-to-day at the workplace. The part of where we support ERG leaders, we usually take it as a volunteer opportunity in addition to their full-time job that, of course, they need to succeed in, is we help the leaders execute on their vision for their teams. They have us kind of in their back pocket in terms of when they plan their programming for the year, either for their member group or at the intersection of multiple groups, with the content, the curated content that we provide for them. So I want to share a couple of stats in terms of the impact of these kind of activations, and then I'll share a short story about an ERG engagement that we recently did. So in terms of some stats, the nice thing about the activations that we do with ERGs, and in general, when team has an experience with us, usually it's for an hour, it can be either virtual or in person, and at the end of the experience, a few minutes before we finish the experience, we pulse the employees, the participants, with a couple of quick questions on their sense of belonging at the company at the end of each team experience. And the numbers that we have seen just recently with the most recent 40,000 participants in our experiences are as follows. First of all, we get 60% of employees respond to these surveys, and we do them all the time on a monthly basis. So we get a pulse, employee sentiment with really great high participation rates. Secondly, we see that 73% report that these type of experiences had a major impact on their experience in their company. We then see that 99% of them ask their employer to have more of these and do more of these type of activations. When we have companies where we work year over year and now we have multi-year data, we see 75% retention rate in employees going back and participating year over year in these experiences, which is incredible to see. The last thing that I'll share is we also have an open text question at the end of each experience, and that's something that's dear to my heart, the results that we've seen there, because we take the text and we just do a quick analysis on it, and what we discovered is that the two words that repeated the most equally in the open text questions were colleagues was the first word, and community was the second word. And the community comes because a lot of time these type of experiences that we offer are, like I said, volunteering opportunities or interacting with community members. So that's where the word community comes from. But then the fact that colleagues came as, the same number was mentioned, that kind of reaffirms our hypothesis when we first started the company, was that if we enable companies and their employees to interact with their community members that they feel that they belong to, that type of emotional connection will translate to a connection to their peers and colleagues at the workplace. And that's indeed what we are seeing with these results, which was a great moment for us to see that this is indeed kind of this emotional connection is being translated as the triangle.
Yeah.
So a quick story about one of the experiences we recently did with one of our corporate partners called Q2. Every year they hold a big town hall event in person. They bring everyone together. Just a couple of months before that event, we had their ERG veteran group did an experience with us. And during that experience, we connected some of the veterans from who were member of this ERG to a local nonprofit in Nashville that supports veterans that come with PTSD or different types of effects that they had from their service. They support them with music programming. And those veterans sat down with a few professional musicians in Nashville, and the musicians asked these employees to share their personal stories. And together during a session of half a day, each member shared their personal story, and the musicians helped them put together a whole song around it. They created a beautiful song around it with the personal stories. The next day, this song was shared with the entire ERG group, and it was so successful and touched so many hearts within the ERG group that the story ended up arriving to the executives and the CEO of the company, and the CEO invited the musicians to their big town hall events, and that song, sharing their personal stories of these employees, was performed in front of the entire company, and these employees were, celebrated and were thanked for their service in this way. So again, that emotional connection is what we are looking to create, and we love to see these heartwarming stories.
Yep, stories are important. Marie, I'm going to ask you to take us home here because we've only got a few minutes left.
Sure.
But what do you see as the most important pillars of building a more inclusive workforce from where you sit?
Wow, the most important pillars. I think I'll anchor my response in where I see an opportunity to advance DEI work more deliberately. And so, as I mentioned with my title, my formal title working at GitHub is shepherding work around OD, organization development, culture, and diversity. And that's pretty deliberate because fundamentally OD work is an inclusive process to manage change with a goal of culture transformation. And so a lot of the principles and practices in OD involve the folks who we are asking to make change very, very, very deliberately. And so we look across levels, we look across functions, and we're finding deliberate spaces to amplify voices, to engage them in the change that we want them to make. And so if we leverage OD practices in order to do DEI work, I think we can actually make some significant progress. And I'll do a quick plug. There's a book that I have publishing that's coming out next month that captures some research and experience around how to do this well. And I'll just highlight some of the four sort of pillars in a holistic framework to leverage OD in service to doing DEI work well. And this was mentioned actually in the fireside chat earlier. One of the first elements is, I'll get to the second element that was mentioned earlier, but the first element is understanding psychological contracts, right? So when employees enter the workspace, they have an expectation from us. There are things that they want to see, there are things that they want to do, and when the contract is broken, they show up very differently at work, and the research shows that it has direct impact on business outcomes. The next thing is psychological safety,
Yes,
and so fostering that is imperative so folks can not only feel that they can be themselves, but they can feel safe to take risks, especially when we're thinking about bringing in allies to help us move the work forward. They have to take a risk as well, in addition to the folks who are feeling marginalized in their transparency about what their experiences have been like. And then the third element of this is having those deliberate sort of cross-company
any collaborations. And finally, you want to leverage very deliberately your employee engagement understanding, right? So knowing what your employees are interested in partnering with, going back to the psychological contracts, you can leverage their interests in service to moving the DEI work forward. I know we have a lot of listening systems, around employee engagement, how are you feeling, your sentiments around belonging and all of that, but quite rarely do we even ask an employee, what do you want to participate in service to driving this work?
Yes.
And I think if we were to take those moments, and maybe not in a survey, perhaps in a focus group, maybe a more intimate setting, we can capture their interests and use all of those things, foundationally leveraging OD to be able to drive DEI differently.
Quick.
Can I have 2 thoughts to add on to that?
We're over time,
Yes,
but
2
go
thoughts,
ahead.
just really important. Senior management commitment and willingness to
Yes,
talk.
absolutely.
If your leaders aren't willing to talk, it is not important to the organization won't change.
100%.
So if you're the guy, your people, men, women that are at the top are committed, they'll talk. The other thing, find something to measure so you can and talk about it so you can actually show progress. Because the organization likes to see progress in some quantified kind of way. And at the end of the day, if you're not showing progress, it means you are not moving forward against the path. It also provides for accountability for the leadership of the organization.
I would love to stay longer, but we are having to move to get to the next session. So Marie, Michal, Heather, Lukeisha, and Derek, thank you all so much. Give me a hand, please.
Thank you.